Now, I have with me Captain Fareh. Captain Fareh has been in AirAsia for since 2009. I precede him. I was 2004. But we both joined at very interesting periods of AirAsia's history. So when I joined, AirAsia was, I don't know, 2 years old. And it was really a really rapid expansion to cover the region. So I was in charge of route planning at the time, and it was really to expand the network. Bo has been one of the original ones. He knows everything. And Bo was at a time when I joined actually based in Bangkok because he was starting up Thai AirAsia. Captain Farah joined in 2009, but he has kind of been in AirAsia before that as a pilot, the old AirAsia. Then he came back to the new AirAsia as our director of flight operations from AirAsia Malaysia. So, Captain, both of us have been very fortunate. It has been a very exciting time. In 2009, well, I saw the rapid expansion of ASEAN network, but you were there really when we had the biggest expansion of our fleet and the changes in the way we transform how we operated. So, but now that we're emerging from COVID, it kind of feels like we are on the cusp of major change in the industry again. So we survived the last 3 years, and now we are emerging to an environment that is completely different. We have to look into our climate, but also this recovery is really difficult. Those of you who have been following aviation will know that there are shortages everywhere in everything, from aircraft parts, hangar slots, pilots, cabin crew, ground staff, and that's contributing to delays around the world, not only AirAsia. So now the big challenge for all airlines is how are we going to find the manpower to power our growth? In the last 3 years, most airlines stopped investing in people. They didn't have money to train. So a lot of pilots retired, they're not replaced. And it's not like you can go to a shop and just buy pilots. You all have to go to school for I don't know how many years, right? So there are two ways that we have been able to do this. I mean, the big one was, of course, which we're going to talk about today, is about diversity, equality, and inclusion. How have we, in the past, used DEI to power AirAsia's needs for the first phase of our growth? And what lessons can we draw from that to power our next phase of growth? So I'm going to be discussing two areas with Captain today. The first is gender diversity. The other one is nationality diversity. We are a group that covers 4 countries, and there have been some interesting experiences that we've had, so to speak, right? So let's start with gender. So as I said earlier, I don't think anyone can dispute that AirAsia has made huge gains, huge impact on bringing more women into aviation. Let's hear it from Captain. Captain, why did we do it in the first place?
Thanks, Manchin. Thanks, Manchin. I think, firstly, I would like to start off by creating the awareness that more often than not, the aviation industry probably similar to other industry, but I think aviation tends to suffer the most whenever there is a downside to economy or an upside to economy. So there's always a cycle, but the problem is the cycle is always more often than not lags behind time. So whenever you think or the industry is saying that we are short of pilots, we'll be short of pilots for the next few years because everybody is reactive to it and things like that. So back then, if we go back to 2009, 2010, we were probably receiving something like 2 aircraft, 3 aircraft a month. And I think across the group, if I can remember correctly, we're receiving something like 20 aircraft a year. So the challenge was always trying to make sure the aircraft is not on ground and it's always flying. So we started hiring, but then we come to a wall where there is no more pilot in the domestic market. Then we start looking at the international market, and it's always been a pinching game, right? So when we sat down and analyzed all this, and we say, okay, I think one of the most important thing that we can do is actually to look forward and try to plan or predict the growth need as much as possible. I mean, there is no perfect plan, but no plan at all is basically failing to fail, planning to fail. So when we look at it, of course, we launched the cadet pilot program and so on and so forth. And what we found was there was a lack of the other gender participant, which is
Not enough women.
the women in aviation, and we're always wondering why. Uh, one of the biggest contributor to this was more the mindset and perception of general public to having their daughters or their sisters taking part in aviation, or being a pilot, especially as we speak about this topic. So we realize that there's a lot more that needs to be done with regards to creating the awareness and the correct perception of the possibility of taking up a career as a pilot for a woman, you know. And so back then in 2009, 2010, I think we did a lot of initiative and we did a lot of programs in creating such awareness, in getting more women to come forward and basically consider taking this as a career. It wasn't easy. Everybody asks why. Are women better pilots, or are we taking it for the sake of having the correct number or percentage of women in aviation? Well, the truth is, we didn't want to discount ourselves of the possibility of having the best of the best, irrespective of gender, ethnicity, nationality, race, and so on and so forth. So we wanted, as long as we can, reach out and get the best of the grassroots supply, which are the graduates coming in to apply and considering aviation industry to be their career. I think we're fine. So unfortunately, even back then, we're talking about 13, 14, 15 years ago, the pathway to aviation wasn't as clear to most people as compared to being a doctor, being an engineer, accountant, a lawyer, right? So we had an uphill battle of creating such awareness, provided education and the knowledge to general public that this can be a rewarding career, and thankfully, I think over the years we've proven we went from one or two women pilot to I think over 160 today. Leading the way as an airline in the region. I'm sure we could do better. This year, after 3 years of no hiring or no recruitment for cadets, we just launched the cadet program again this year. But again, we see there is lack of participation of women to come forward in aviation.
So let's look at some statistics. So this is the profile of AirAsia today. We are 35, just under 35% women. I think nobody can fault us for not trying. We have really tried. But if I'm entirely honest, 10 years ago when I look at these numbers, we're about the same, right? What has changed? Actually, within the management of AirAsia, a lot has changed, right? We see a lot more women participating. But so, of course, being a young company also helps. There are a lot of more women who are joining the workforce and having less of a stigma issue. But it's still going to be time before we can change that. But let's look at the professions. So if you look at this, we have a pretty good balance. In fact, for cabin crew, we have a lot more male cabin crew than we used to have. But you can see where the big gaps are. You can see that engineers, we only have 10% of women. And pilots, even though we have 160, which is more than any other airline in Southeast Asia, is still only 6.7%. Now, when we talk about gender targets of 30%, I don't even know when we're going to ever get there. Let's look at globally. This is the global share of women pilots. Now, we are actually above global average, 5.8%. This is in 2021. We're today 6.6%. AirAsia is 6.6%. But you look at some of the carriers that have been around forever. Look at Lufthansa, United Airlines. They're still doing 6.9, 7.7%, which is really quite shocking. And the airline that has done the most, and I heard these statistics very recently, is actually Indigo in India. They're now at about 13% female pilots. So if we are benchmarking against the best, we've got twice the way to go. So I would put it to you, we've done our awareness, okay? Is that enough? Is there more that we need to do? And what else can we do?
I think Manchin, yeah, definitely there's a lot more that can be done. I mean, first of all, I think the organizational policies have got to be better, right? Women naturally, eventually they'll get married, they'll have children. Now, it's always a stigma for companies to want to spend on women to become pilots because their lifespan is too short, right? But to be fair, I mean, we have women captains today who have kids
Yeah.
and are still flying, right? And can it be better? Yes, it can be better. I think there's a lot of things that can be done for us as an organization, definitely in terms of policies, and of course in terms of processes and system. We should be able to allow more flexibility in choices of flight in terms of probably time of the day that I travel for work, as long as the company don't lose productivity, right? I think we can definitely promote this. I mean, there's so many airlines in the world that does that. And I think we can definitely progress towards that environment
So
where
you
we
mean
provide, yeah.
letting at least the women be able to express the choice to have daytime flights, for example?
Yes, definitely. We can have these choices be given to them, for example, that they want to do daytime flights. They can come back as per normal office and be with their kids in the evening and things like that. I mean, within reasonable means and within as much as possible that, for as long as we can manage them without increasing our cost and maintaining our productivity, I think why not,
Yeah.
right?
The other thing I was looking at in my kind of sustainability role is actually a very overlooked issue, which is really about women starting a family. A lot of women don't become pilots, or those who become pilots have to make a choice. Am I going to have a family, have no kids, or am I going to fly? Now, actually, our legislation here in Southeast Asia is so far behind what's happening in other parts of the world. So I just learned last year that if you're a female pilot and you're pregnant, you immediately have to stop flying and then you go on unpaid leave unless you can find a position somewhere in the company. And that's across the board in all Southeast Asian countries. But when you look at the legislation in the US, there is no such thing. In the US, it's a medical decision. If a doctor certifies that you have a low risk pregnancy, you can fly right up to the time when you're about to give birth. So there is this huge gap. So why do women in this region are subjected to these kind of policies, but not women in another country, in other countries? So some of these things we haven't actually looked at. Nobody has kind of looked at these laws. Why? I'm sorry to say, because most of the people doing it are men. You never have to think about it. The other thing we had to look at is what happens to women who have had children and they are still nursing. What do we do? Where do a women pilot or women cabin crew have to pump? So those are some of the interesting questions we have had to consider. And when I speak with my colleagues at cabin crew department, I said, have you thought about this? Where do the cabin crew who have had babies have to pump? They said, we know it's an issue, but we try not to think about it. I don't think we can shy away from that right now. And those
No,
are
no,
some of the
yeah.
policies we need to look at.
I mean, definitely that's true. But if we look back over the years, for Malaysia anyway, I mean, Malaysia Airlines cabin crew, as an example, back 30 years ago, had to resign the moment they are pregnant with no option of coming back to work. And that has changed, right? And we have changed too. Paternity leave, as an example. What was it before? 2 days?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are now, what, 10 days?
So you don't need the father. I mean, now we're giving more importance for the father to be around, right? I think we will evolve. I think we just need a bit more effort, definitely. I mean, we talk about can a woman pilot still be in the cockpit up to a certain period? Maybe it's something that we can bring it to the table with our regulators and medical, to ascertain whether that's safe or not. If it is, why not? But yeah, those policies I think really need to be looked into.
Very interesting that you mentioned this thing about women not Malaysia Airlines having to stop. Actually, I just discovered in a very advanced country nearby, I shall not name which one, up until last year, a cabin crew who has had a baby is not allowed to be a cabin crew again. I'll leave you to guess which country that is, right? So we have gone so far ahead of that, and of course we would like to take this opportunity, of course in AirAsia, to advance the conditions for women to join the industry. But then I want to go back to this question about women being in the industry. So obviously, I have had a phenomenal experience since I joined aviation. But the issue of diversity is always something that people think that women should talk about. But when I joined, there was no women. All the guys that have to work, all the people that I work with were men, and most of them were very senior. So I think back about it, I think it's kind of, I'm quite amazed that they would entertain me. Generally, I didn't have any problems with any of the men in AirAsia except maybe one or two, who shall also be unnamed. But how much of this is really pure luck, or how much does organizational culture plays into this?
I have to say, for those of you who do not know AirAsia, right, I think as an organization, we are totally different culturally. As what I think Captain Adrian said earlier, how our pilots coming into the system are trained not just technically or regulatory, but also trained to understand the values that we have in terms of the focus that we have. Safety has always been paramount. It's the most important thing, especially for an airline, of course. But other values that we brought into the system, such as equality, irrespective whether you come from the north of the country or the east of the country, or it doesn't really matter, right? So equality in this environment where we practice meritocracy, over the years has become, our bread and butter, has become the norm without looking at the differences. Yeah. So it's totally an inclusive society, which is very, at times we said it, very loosely, but it is something that often is misunderstood, right? Especially in the environment or in the country which is so diversified, such as Malaysia, right? And we've led the way. I think I've seen some slide from you where, in terms of our diversity, we're probably leading the way within the group, right? In Malaysia.
Yeah. So, we can go on forever about this women topic, right?
Yeah.
But I want to, move on to the topic of national diversity. So let's look at AirAsia. This is what we are today.
Yeah.
So we are, obviously Malaysia being the biggest operation, followed by Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines. You can see that our workforce kind of reflects. So when you were DFO, obviously some of the things that we do, a lot of things that we do is not just concentrated in one country. It's always rolled out to all 4 countries. So we all have very interesting experience working across countries. So I'd like you to share, what were some of the challenges you had when you were trying to get all these different nationalities to go in one direction?
There's tons of it, but but obviously, national culture of a country will affect the organizational culture, will affect the professional culture, right? Whether we like it or not, it exists. A culture is something that's been built and bred, over centuries, probably, right? So whenever we go to a country, in terms of setting up a new airline, one of the things that we have to. It's by the virtue of no choice. We have to understand what is the national culture, what is norm, and how do we find a strategy to include them within ourselves. Because without inclusivity, it is extremely difficult to get a buy-in, right? So the experience that we've had over the four biggest countries that we are operating in today, of course, it's easier said today, but 13, 14 years ago when we just started, I mean, we were in Thailand setting up Thai AirAsia, where, it's Tony's favorite story, the pilots will not share the van with the cabin crew because they are of a different status. Not to say it's right or wrong, it's just what the culture is. And us being AirAsia, we have to break into that barrier, break through the barrier to bring them, closer together. And look at them today. It's extremely, totally different, right? So learning from one another, every culture have got their strength, every culture has got their weakness. We got to understand that first. The organizational culture that we want to embed within it, they need to understand why. So the buy-in come in, and that by itself, I think, brought us all closer together, respecting, how the Indonesians are, how the Filipinos are, how the Thais are, how the Malaysians are, understanding all that, respecting all that, but understanding what organizational culture that we want. We want to groom, we want to breed, and we want for everybody to adopt. And when everybody has that buy-in, we're extremely strong as one brand.
So, I mean, that's just the last question for me to ask you, which is an important one. So now that you've kind of overcome that, what are the gains that we've actually gotten from getting everybody to work together?
Strength in diversity, basically. Us alone, we can only learn from ourselves, right? There's so many things over the years that we've learned from the Thais and the Filipinos and the Indonesian, and them learning from Malaysians, and putting all this together. We have many, many platforms. One example is our safety platform. The safety review platform that we have on a quarterly basis gets everyone together into a single room, analyzing all the data, understanding what was wrong, understanding what was the gap, understanding how to overcome it. Because we're dealing with human, which is the most complex thing that you can deal with. Changing of a culture is the most complex thing you can deal with, right? Takeaway from that is we all, I think, across the group, appreciate that we are able to share all this, understanding the weakness and the strength, and learning from one another on how do you solve this problem and how do we solve this problem, and find the best solution, find the best practice, implement it across the board, raising each other's standard across the group. I think that's definitely a benefit. So we basically go back out, educate, share the knowledge, create awareness. Then we train to competency. We go back and analyze the data, and the cycle continues of continuous improvement. Right? I think that's what we've learned the most, through this experience.
I think that gives us an edge because no one else that doesn't have this sort of diverse network will be able to have this sort of sharing. If you are just, say, Thai Airways or you're just Malaysia Airlines, you don't have the benefit of regional hindsight, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Captain.
Thank you, Mun Ching.
Yeah.